Billy Martinez kicked his red ball across the dusty ground of New Haven's town square and laughed as it bounced off the fountain steps. The 8-year-old boy had bright brown eyes and messy black hair that his mother always tried to fix but never stayed in place. His friends Tommy and Lisa were playing nearby with their own toys, while their parents talked about the weather and crops and other boring grown-up things. New Haven was a small colony on the edge of human space where everyone knew everyone else and children could play safely in the streets. The buildings were simple but clean, and the air smelled like fresh grass and the weird purple flowers that grew everywhere on this planet. Billy loved living here because there was always somewhere to run and play and explore. The morning sun was warm on his face when he heard the loud humming sound coming from the sky. Billy looked up and saw 3 big silver ships coming down toward the landing pad near the town center. He had seen ships before, but these looked different with strange curves and lights that pulsed green and blue. The other children stopped playing and came over to watch with him. Jake Sullivan, the colony administrator, came running out of his office building, fixing his tie and looking nervous like he always did when important visitors came. Billy's father, Dan, had told him that Jake was a good man, but worried too much about making everyone happy. The ships landed with a soft thud and kicked up small clouds of dust that made Billy sneeze. The ship doors opened with a hissing sound, and out came the strangest creatures Billy had ever seen. They were tall like grown-ups, but covered in green and brown scales that caught the sunlight. Their heads were long and narrow with big yellow eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. They wore fancy clothes with lots of shiny metal pieces, and walked like they owned the whole planet. Billy counted 6 of the lizard aliens as they came down the ramp from the biggest ship. The one in front was even taller than the others and had more decorations on his clothes. His scales were darker, and he moved with the kind of confidence that Billy's teacher, Mrs. Roberts, had when she was really angry about something. Jake Sullivan walked up to meet them with a big fake smile that Billy could tell was not real. The colony administrator bowed slightly and started talking in the polite voice he used when he was trying not to make anyone mad. Billy could not hear all the words, but he caught something about trade agreements and diplomatic meetings and welcome to New Haven. The tall lizard alien who seemed to be the leader did not smile back. His yellow eyes looked around the town square like he was judging everything he saw and finding it lacking. When he spoke, his voice was deep and scratchy like rocks grinding together. Billy did not understand the language, but the tone made him feel uncomfortable. More colonists came out of their homes and shops to see the visitors. Billy's mother, Maria, appeared beside him and put her hand on his shoulder in the protective way she did when she was worried about something. She whispered to Mrs. Johnson, who lived next door, and both women watched the aliens with careful expressions. The lizard aliens followed Jake Sullivan toward the government building, where they would have their important meetings. Billy thought they looked mean and unfriendly compared to the other alien visitors who sometimes came to New Haven. Those aliens usually smiled and brought gifts and seemed happy to meet humans, but these ones acted like they were doing everyone a big favor just by being there. As the group walked past the fountain, Billy's red ball rolled directly into their path. He had been bouncing it against the wall while watching the aliens and had not been paying attention to where it went. The ball came to rest right in front of the fancy boots of the leader alien. Billy ran after his ball without thinking about it because his father had always told him to take care of his things and not leave them lying around. He was a fast runner and reached the ball quickly, but as he bent down to pick it up, he accidentally bumped into the tall alien's leg. The leader alien stopped walking and looked down at Billy with those big yellow eyes. For a moment, everything was very quiet, and Billy felt scared like he had done something terrible. The alien's mouth opened, showing all those sharp teeth, and he made a sound that might have been words in his own language. Billy said sorry the way his mother had taught him to do when he made mistakes. He held his ball tight against his chest and tried to step backward, but the alien moved faster than Billy expected. The creature leaned down so his long, scaly face was close to Billy's, and his eyes seemed to glow with anger. What happened next would change everything for humanity forever. The alien opened his mouth wider, and Billy saw something green and slimy building up behind those sharp teeth. Before anyone could move or speak or do anything to stop it, the alien spit directly into Billy's face. The green liquid hit Billy's skin and immediately began to burn like fire. Billy screamed and fell to the ground, clutching his face as the acid ate through his skin. The pain was worse than anything he had ever felt, and he could smell his own flesh burning. Maria Martinez ran to her son faster than she had ever moved in her life. She dropped to her knees beside Billy and tried to wipe the green substance away, but it was too late. The damage was already done and still spreading across the little boy's face. Jake Sullivan stood frozen in shock for several seconds before he found his voice and demanded to know what the alien had done. The leader alien, whose name was Vextar, according to his translator device, simply looked at the burning child with satisfaction. Vextar spoke in perfect English through his translator, and his words cut through the air like knives. He said that inferior species needed to learn proper respect, and that the child should have been more careful around his betters. He showed no remorse or concern for what he had done to an innocent 8-year-old boy. Other colonists came running when they heard Billy's screams. Dr. Amy Foster pushed through the crowd and immediately began treating the burns while Maria held her son and cried. The green acid had left terrible marks across Billy's face that would scar him for life. Jake Sullivan demanded that Vextar apologize and provide medical assistance for Billy, but the alien refused. He said that his diplomatic immunity protected him from any consequences and that humans should teach their children better manners. The other lizard aliens stood behind their leader and showed no emotion about the suffering they had caused. Vextar announced that the trade negotiations were canceled because he found human behavior unacceptable. He said his people would remember this incident and that there would be consequences for allowing a child to disrespect a Zeltharian ambassador. Then he turned and walked back to his ship, followed by his companions. The aliens left New Haven within an hour, while Billy was still screaming in pain despite Dr. Foster's best efforts to help him. The green acid had burned deep into his skin and would leave permanent scars that would remind everyone of this day for the rest of his life, as the Zeltharian ships disappeared into the sky. Jake Sullivan sent an emergency message to Earth reporting what had happened. He included video footage of the attack and Dr. Foster's medical report about Billy's injuries. The message would reach Earth in 6 hours and change the course of human history. Billy Martinez survived the attack, but his face would never be the same. The scars formed ugly patterns across his left cheek and forehead that made him look like he had been branded by a monster. But worse than the physical damage was what the attack represented. An alien had deliberately hurt a human child for no reason other than cruelty and pride. The Zeltharians had shown their true nature and their contempt for humanity. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed and awakened something in humans that had been sleeping for too long. The age of human patience was ending. The emergency message from New Haven reached Earth Defense Command at exactly 1400 hours on a Tuesday that would be remembered forever. Admiral Troy Richardson was reviewing supply reports when his aide, Commander Ryan Brooks, burst into his office with the urgent transmission from the outer colonies. Richardson read the report twice before he believed what he was seeing. An alien diplomat had attacked a human child with what appeared to be biological acid for the simple crime of accidentally bumping into him. The medical files showed burns that would leave permanent scars, and the video footage was even worse than the written description. Within 30 minutes, President Lisa Chen was on a secure video call with Richardson and the other military leaders. General Kate Morrison joined from Luna Base, while Admiral Patricia Hayes connected from the Mars Defense Station. The president's face was pale with anger as she watched the footage of Billy Martinez being attacked. Chen had been president for 4 years and had always preferred diplomatic solutions to military ones. She believed in peace and cooperation between species and had worked hard to maintain good relationships with alien governments. But as she watched an 8-year-old boy screaming in pain from an unprovoked attack, her philosophy began to change. Dr. Alex Carter was brought in from the Xenobiology Institute to analyze the alien substance that had burned Billy's face. Carter was humanity's leading expert on alien biology and had studied dozens of different species over his 20-year career. What he found in the chemical analysis made everyone in the room go silent. The green liquid was not just saliva or a natural defense mechanism. It was a carefully engineered biological weapon designed specifically to cause maximum pain and permanent damage to human tissue. The Zeltharians had created this substance in laboratories for the sole purpose of hurting humans in the most cruel way possible. Carter explained that the acid contained genetic markers that targeted human DNA while leaving Zeltharian skin completely unharmed. This meant the attack on Billy was not a moment of anger or accident, but a deliberate act of biological warfare against a defenseless child. Intelligence reports began coming in from other human colonies as word of the incident spread. Colonel Dan Martinez, who was Billy's father and a military engineer, provided additional information that made the situation even worse. The Zeltharians had been committing similar attacks on humans for years, but had always covered them up or hidden behind diplomatic immunity. Shipping captain named Steve Parker reported that Zeltharian traders had spit acid on his crew members during disputes over cargo prices. A mining supervisor called Linda Watson said Zeltharian inspectors had burned workers who complained about safety violations. A teacher named Kevin Walsh described how Zeltharian visitors had threatened children at schools on border colonies. The pattern was clear and horrifying. The Zeltharians viewed humans as inferior creatures who deserved punishment for any perceived disrespect. They had been systematically abusing their diplomatic status to commit acts of torture against innocent people, including children. President Chen called an emergency session of the Earth Defense Council, bringing together representatives from every human colony and military installation. The meeting was held in the secure chamber beneath Geneva, where humanity's most important decisions were made. Admiral Richardson presented the military assessment to the assembled leaders. The Zeltharian Empire controlled 12 star systems compared to humanity's 3, but their technology was not significantly advanced beyond human capabilities. Their main advantage had always been their assumption that humans were too peaceful to fight back. General Morrison showed tactical analyses of Zeltharian military installations and ship designs. Their forces were organized around intimidation and overwhelming firepower against weaker opponents, but they had no experience fighting an enemy that could match their technology and exceed their determination. The representatives from the outer colonies spoke with one voice, demanding justice for Billy Martinez and all the other victims of Zeltharian cruelty. Governor Mike Stevens from Alpha Centauri said his people were ready to support any military action. Administrator Sarah Blake from the mining colonies offered to convert their industrial capacity to weapons production, President Chen listened to every speaker before she stood to address the council. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the steel underneath her words as she spoke about the attack on Billy and what it meant for humanity's future. She said that humanity had chosen peace not because they were weak, but because they believed in the value of life and cooperation. The Zeltharians had mistaken this choice for weakness and had used it to justify cruelty against innocent people. They had crossed a line that could not be ignored. Chen announced that she was authorizing the activation of classified military projects that had been mothballed since the last interstellar conflict. The Phoenix fleet would be brought out of storage and upgraded with the latest technology. Military reserves would be called to active duty, and civilian industries would be converted to support the war effort. The President's declaration was broadcast across human space and sent to every alien, government including the Zeltharians. Her words were simple and direct, with no room for misunderstanding. She said that an attack on one human child was an attack on all humanity. The Zeltharian Empire had committed an act of biological warfare against a defenseless 8-year-old boy and had shown no remorse for their actions. They had refused to provide medical assistance or compensation and had threatened further violence. Therefore, the United Earth government was declaring total war against the Zeltharian Empire. All diplomatic relations were severed immediately. All trade agreements were canceled. All Zeltharian assets in human space were frozen. Any Zeltharian ship that entered human territory would be destroyed. Without warning, Chen explained that this was not a war for territory or resources, but a war for justice and the protection of innocent life. Humanity would not stop fighting until the Zeltharian Empire surrendered unconditionally and Ambassador Vextar was brought to trial for his crimes. The reaction across human space was immediate and overwhelming. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers wanting to serve in the military. Factories began retooling their production lines to manufacture weapons and ships. Scientists worked around the clock, developing new technologies for the war effort captain. Laura Hayes, who commanded a merchant vessel, offered to convert her ship for military use. Engineer Maya Johnson volunteered to help upgrade weapon systems. Professor Kevin Walsh, who studied alien languages, joined intelligence services to help decode enemy communications on New Haven. Billy Martinez was still recovering from his injuries, but his courage had inspired billions of humans across the galaxy. His scarred face became a symbol of Zeltharian cruelty and human determination. Children on every human world knew his name and understood why their parents were suddenly talking about war. The Zeltharian response came within hours of Chen's declaration. Supreme Chancellor Korvac dismissed the human ultimatum as the tantrum of an inferior species that did not understand their place in the galaxy. He said humans had always been weak and would never have the courage to fight a real war. Korvac announced that the Zeltharian Empire would teach humanity a lesson about respecting their betters. Any human who dared to attack Zeltharian forces would face complete destruction. He promised that Ambassador Vextar would be protected and that no human would ever touch him. What Supreme Chancellor Korvac did not understand was that he had just made the worst mistake in Zeltharian history. Humans had spent generations building weapons and ships and training soldiers while maintaining peaceful relations with their neighbors. They had hoped never to use their military strength, but they had never stopped preparing for the day when peace would fail. Admiral Richardson stood in the war room surrounded by tactical displays showing human and Zeltharian positions across the galaxy. For the first time in decades, every human military unit was on high alert and moving toward combat positions, General Morrison reviewed the deployment orders for the first wave of attacks. Human strategy would focus on speed and precision rather than overwhelming force. They would strike at Zeltharian military installations while broadcasting Billy's story to show why they were fighting. Dr. Carter worked with weapons specialists to develop countermeasures against Zeltharian biological weapons. If the aliens wanted to use torture devices against children, then humans would make sure they could never do it again. President Chen spoke to the human population one more time before the fighting began. She said that humanity had always believed in protecting the innocent and defending those who could not defend themselves. Billy Martinez represented every human child who deserved to grow up safe from monsters. The war that was about to begin would change everything about how humans saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. They were no longer content to be peaceful neighbors who ignored injustice. They had become the guardians of innocence and the enemies of cruelty. Supreme Chancellor Korvac had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since their earliest days. He had reminded them that some things were worth fighting for and that some enemies deserved. Supreme Chancellor Korvac stood in his throne chamber on the Zeltharian homeworld and laughed when he received President Chen's declaration of war. The massive reptilian leader had ruled his empire for 30 years and had never encountered a species foolish enough to challenge Zeltharian supremacy. Korvac called his military advisors to discuss the human threat, and all of them agreed that humanity posed no real danger. General Vorthak reminded the Chancellor that humans controlled only 3 star systems, while the Zeltharian Empire commanded 12. Admiral Zephyra added that human ships were smaller and less heavily armed than Zeltharian vessels, the intelligence. Reports painted humans as a peaceful species that had not fought a major war in over 50 years. Their military was small and primarily focused on defense rather than conquest. Most importantly, they seemed to lack the ruthless determination necessary for interstellar warfare. Ambassador Vextar was brought before the Chancellor to explain what had happened on New Haven. The diplomat showed no remorse for attacking Billy Martinez and insisted that he had acted correctly in teaching proper respect to an inferior species. Korvac praised Vextar for maintaining Zeltharian dignity. The Chancellor decided that humanity needed to be taught a lesson about challenging their betters. He ordered a small battle group to attack the nearest human outpost and show them the consequences of their foolish declaration. He expected the humans to surrender immediately once they saw real Zeltharian military power. What Supreme Chancellor Korvac did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this day longer than anyone realized. Deep in classified military installations, humans had been building ships and weapons that no alien government knew existed. They called it the Phoenix Fleet because it would rise from the ashes of humanity's peaceful era. Admiral Richardson stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Terra's Fury, and watched as the Phoenix Fleet came out of hiding for the first time in decades. Massive battleships that had been stored in asteroid bases powered up their engines and prepared for combat. Carriers loaded with fighter squadrons emerged from camouflaged hangars on remote moons. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the destroyer Lightning. Strike and marveled at the technology his engineers had developed during the years of peace. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything the aliens had seen. Their weapon systems used innovative designs that prioritized precision over raw power. The first Zeltharian attack came at the mining colony on Kepler 7, where 300 humans worked extracting rare metals. The alien battle group expected to find defenseless civilians who would beg for mercy. Instead, they encountered Captain Sarah Blake and her converted mining vessels that had been secretly armed with military-grade weapons. Blake had grown up on mining colonies and knew every trick for moving quickly through asteroid fields and using industrial equipment as weapons. When the Zeltharian ships approached Kepler 7, they found themselves facing opponents who fought like cornered wildcats. The battle lasted only 40 minutes, but it changed everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. Blake's miners used their drilling lasers to slice through Zeltharian armor, while their cargo haulers rammed enemy fighters at speeds that should have been impossible for civilian ships Commander Lisa Parker, coordinated the defense from the colony command center and broadcast Billy Martinez's story to the attacking Zeltharians. She wanted them to understand exactly why humans were fighting and what they had awakened with their cruelty. The Zeltharian battle group was completely destroyed with no human casualties. Captain Blake sent a message to Supreme Chancellor Korvac, explaining that this was just the beginning of humanity's response to the attack on Billy Martinez. She promised that every Zeltharian who had hurt humans would face justice. Admiral Richardson launched the first major offensive against the Zeltharian military base at Vega Prime. The Phoenix fleet moved through hyperspace faster than alien sensors, could track, and appeared in the Vega system without warning. The Zeltharians had never faced an enemy that could strike so quickly and disappear before reinforcements arrived. General Morrison led the ground assault on Vega Prime, using tactics that the aliens had never encountered. Human soldiers moved in, small teams that used stealth and precision, rather than overwhelming force. They struck at communication centers and supply depots while avoiding unnecessary casualties. The psychological warfare was just as effective as the military attacks. Every human unit carried recordings of Billy Martinez telling his story and explaining why the war had started. They broadcast these messages on Zeltharian communication frequencies, so every alien soldier knew they were fighting to defend child torturers. Dr. Carter had developed new weapons specifically designed to counter Zeltharian biological warfare. Human soldiers carried acid neutralizers and protective gear that made them immune to the same weapons that had scarred Billy's face. The Zeltharians discovered that their favorite torture devices were useless against prepared humans. Captain Tommy Wilson commanded a stealth frigate that infiltrated the Zeltharian communication network and intercepted military orders. What he discovered shocked even the hardened human military leaders. The Zeltharians had been planning a campaign of biological warfare against human children to break morale and force surrender. The intercepted messages revealed that Ambassador Vexatar's attack on Billy had been a test to see how humans would react to violence against their young. The Zeltharians planned to escalate their attacks if humans showed weakness. They had prepared more biological weapons specifically designed to target human children. This intelligence was immediately transmitted to President Chen, who authorized the use of humanity's most classified weapon systems. The war was no longer just about justice for Billy Martinez, but about preventing genocide against human children across the galaxy. Colonel Dan Martinez led a special operations team tasked with hunting down war criminals and gathering evidence of Zeltharian atrocities. As Billy's father, he had personal motivation, but his military training kept him focused on the mission. His team included tech specialist Maya Johnson, who could hack any alien computer system. The evidence they uncovered was horrifying. The Zeltharians had been conducting experiments on captured humans to develop more effective biological weapons. They had tortured prisoners to test pain tolerance and studied human children to find better ways to cause psychological trauma. Commander Laura Hayes discovered a secret Zeltharian facility where human prisoners were being held for biological Weapons testing. Her rescue mission saved 43 humans, including 12 children who had been kidnapped from border colonies. The footage of these rescues was broadcast across human space. The liberated prisoners told stories of Zeltharian cruelty that made Billy's attack seem minor by comparison. Children as young as 5 had been subjected to biological weapons tests, while their parents were forced to watch. Adult prisoners had been used as experimental subjects for new torture devices. Supreme Chancellor Korvac began to realize that he had made a terrible mistake in attacking humanity. His forces were being defeated at every engagement, and human ships were appearing in systems that should have been impossible to reach. Worse yet, other alien governments were starting to question their alliance with the Zeltharian Empire. The Zerillian Confederacy withdrew their support after seeing footage of Zeltharian experiments on human children. The Mantis Collective canceled their mutual defense treaty and demanded that the Zeltharians end their biological weapons program. Even longtime allies were abandoning the Empire. General Vorthak reported that Zeltharian morale was collapsing as stories of human determination spread through the military ranks. Soldiers who had expected easy victories against weak humans instead found themselves facing opponents who fought with terrifying effectiveness and unbreakable resolve. Admiral Zephyra's fleet was destroyed while trying to defend the outer colonies of the Zeltharian Empire. Human ships had surrounded her forces and broadcast Billy's story before demanding surrender. When Zephyra refused, the humans had destroyed her entire battle group without losing a single vessel. The war that was supposed to last days and end with human surrender had become a disaster for the Zeltharian Empire. Their military was being systematically dismantled by opponents they had underestimated. Their allies were abandoning them, and their government was losing control. Korvac sent desperate messages to other alien governments asking for help against the human invasion, but no one wanted to support a species that tortured children. The galaxy had seen the evidence of Zeltharian atrocities and decided that humanity was fighting a just war precedent. Chen addressed the human population and explained that the war was entering its final phase. The Zeltharian Empire was collapsing under the weight of their own cruelty and human determination. Soon, Billy Martinez would have the justice he deserved, but humanity was not satisfied with military victory alone. They wanted to ensure that no alien species would ever again consider attacking human children. The war would continue until the Zeltharian Empire was completely destroyed, and its leaders faced trial for their crimes. Admiral Richardson prepared for the final assault on the Zeltharian homeworld, while Captain Brooks coordinated the hunt for Ambassador. The hunt for Ambassador Vextar became the most important mission of the war as human forces closed in on the Zeltharian homeworld. Colonel Dan Martinez had requested personal command of the operation to capture the alien who had scarred his son's face, and he brought together the best specialists in human space. Maya Johnson was the finest computer expert in the military and could break into any alien system within hours. Professor Kevin Walsh spoke 14 alien languages and understood Zeltharian culture better than any other human. Captain Steve Parker had tracked criminals across 3 star systems and never failed to find his target. The team also included Dr. Amy Foster, who had treated Billy's injuries and wanted to gather evidence of Zeltharian biological weapons for the war crimes trials. Sergeant Lisa Watson provided security expertise, while Commander Ryan Thompson handled communications and intelligence coordination. Their first lead came from intercepted Zeltharian military transmissions that mentioned a secret transport leaving the capital city just hours before human forces arrived. Maya Johnson traced the ship's identification codes through the alien communication network and discovered it was heading for a hidden base in the outer system. The base was located on a barren moon that had been excavated by Zeltharian engineers to create underground facilities. Orbital scans showed extensive tunnel networks and defensive systems that suggested this was more than just a hiding place. It appeared to be a major research installation. Captain Parker led the reconnaissance mission using stealth shuttles that could avoid Zeltharian sensors. What they found horrified even experienced soldiers who had seen the worst of alien cruelty. The base contained laboratories where human prisoners had been subjected to biological weapons experiments. The rescue teams found 37 survivors in various stages of torture and experimentation. Some had been exposed to different versions of the acid that had burned Billy's face, while others showed evidence of psychological torture designed to break their minds. Dr. Foster worked around the clock to treat the rescued prisoners while documenting their injuries for the war crimes evidence. The Zeltharians had been developing weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering without killing their victims quickly. One of the survivors was a young girl named Amy Martinez, who was only 6 years old and had been kidnapped from a border colony 3 months earlier. She had been subjected to daily acid attacks to test human pain tolerance, and her testimony would later be crucial in convicting Zeltharian war criminals. Professor Walsh interrogated captured Zeltharian scientists and learned that Vextar had been overseeing the development of new biological weapons at this facility. The ambassador was not just a diplomat, but also a researcher who took personal pleasure in designing ways to torture human children. Intelligence reports indicated that Vextar had fled to another hidden facility deeper in Zeltharian space where he was coordinating the Empire's final desperate defense. The facility was protected by the last remaining battle group of the Zeltharian military Admiral Richardson approved a joint operation between Colonel Martinez's Special Forces team and Captain Sarah Blake's assault fleet. The military would engage the Zeltharian defenders while the hunters infiltrated the facility to capture Vextar alive. The battle for the research station lasted 18 hours and showcased the full extent of human military innovation. Blake's ships used new weapons systems that could penetrate Zeltharian shields, while her fighters employed tactics that confused alien defensive computers. Meanwhile, Colonel Martinez led his team through the station's maintenance tunnels using detailed maps provided by rescued prisoners who had memorized the layout during their captivity. They moved silently through the alien facility while the battle raged outside. Maya Johnson disabled the station's security systems and opened blast doors that had been sealed to prevent human infiltration. Her work allowed the team to reach the central laboratory where Vextar was attempting to destroy evidence of his experiments. The ambassador was not alone when the humans found him. He was accompanied by 6 Zeltharian guards and 3 other scientists who had participated in the torture experiments. All of them were armed and prepared to fight rather than surrender. The firefight in the laboratory lasted only minutes, but felt like hours to Colonel Martinez, who finally faced the alien who had hurt his son. Vextar fought with desperate fury, but human training and equipment proved superior to alien desperation. When the smoke cleared, all the Zeltharian guards were dead, and the scientists were wounded but alive for questioning. Vextar himself had been stunned by a human neural disruptor and lay unconscious among the wreckage of his torture devices. Colonel Martinez stood over the fallen ambassador and thought about his son Billy, who was still recovering from injuries that would scar him for life. The alien who had caused so much pain and suffering was finally captured, but the victory felt hollow compared to what had been lost. Dr. Foster examined Vextar and confirmed that he was physically unharmed and suitable for transport to Earth, where he would stand trial for war crimes. The ambassador would face justice for his attack on Billy and for the torture of dozens of other human victims. The captured research station contained evidence of Zeltharian atrocities that shocked even hardened military investigators. Thousands of documents detailed experiments on human prisoners, including children as young as 4 years old. Video recordings showed aliens laughing while they tortured helpless victims. Professor Walsh translated the research notes and discovered that the Zeltharians had been planning to use biological weapons against human civilian populations. They intended to attack schools and hospitals to maximize casualties among children and create panic. Maya Johnson found computer files that listed every human colony targeted for biological weapons attacks. The Zeltharians had planned to sterilize entire worlds if humans continued to resist their demands for surrender. This evidence was immediately transmitted to President Chen, who authorized the final phase of the war. The Zeltharian Empire would be completely destroyed, and its leaders would face trial for attempted genocide against humanity. Supreme Chancellor Korvac sent a desperate message offering to negotiate surrender and turn over all war criminals in exchange for mercy. President Chen's response was broadcast across the galaxy for all alien governments to hear. She said that the time for negotiation had ended when Vextar spit acid on an 8-year-old boy. The Zeltharian Empire had chosen to torture children and plan genocide against innocent civilians. There would be no mercy for species that targeted the defenseless. Admiral Richardson began the final assault on the Zeltharian homeworld, while Colonel Martinez transported his prisoner to Earth for trial. Vexatar would face justice in front of Billy Martinez and the families of every victim of Zeltharian cruelty. The transport ship carrying Vextar was escorted by the most powerful battle group in human space because the prisoner was too valuable to risk losing. Every government in the galaxy would be watching the trial, and humanity wanted to show that justice applied equally to all species. During the journey to Earth, Vextar regained consciousness and demanded to speak with his captors. Colonel Martinez agreed to meet with the ambassador, but only to gather information about other Zeltharian war criminals. The conversation was recorded and later used as evidence in the trial. Vextar showed no remorse for his actions and claimed that humans deserved punishment for being inferior to Zeltharians. He said that attacking Billy had been justified because the child had shown disrespect. When Colonel Martinez asked about the torture experiments, Vextar laughed and said that human suffering was amusing to superior beings. He described the screams of child victims as beautiful music and promised that other aliens would continue his work. The recording of this conversation was broadcast across human space and hardened public opinion against showing any mercy to Zeltharian war criminals. Even humans who had opposed the war now supported complete annihilation of the Empire. President Chen announced that the trial of Ambassador Vextar would be held on Earth with representatives from every human colony serving as witnesses. The proceedings would be broadcast to every alien government as a warning about the consequences of attacking human children. Billy Martinez was invited to attend the trial and face the alien who had scarred him. Despite his young age, he agreed to testify because he wanted other children to know that monsters could be defeated. The boy who had been playing with a ball in New Haven's town square would soon stand before the galaxy and show that humanity protected its innocent. His courage had started a war that would change the balance of power among the stars. Vextar's capture marked the beginning of the end for the Zeltharian Empire, but it was not the end of human determination. The trial would show every species in the galaxy that there were consequences for cruelty and that some lines should never be crossed. The age of human justice was about to begin, and the galaxy would learn what happened when someone hurt a human child. The final assault on the Zeltharian homeworld began at dawn, when Admiral Richardson's flagship Human Spirit led 1,000 vessels toward the planet where Billy Martinez's tormentor had been born. The largest military operation in human history was about to bring justice to a species that had chosen cruelty over compassion. The Zeltharian defenses were impressive, with orbital platforms and defense satellites surrounding their capital world, but they had been designed to fight conventional enemies. Human ships moved in patterns that confused alien targeting systems, while their weapons struck with precision that left defenders helpless. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the destroyer Lightning Strike and led the first wave of attacks against the orbital fortifications. His ship danced between enemy fire while launching missiles that disabled Zeltharian weapons without destroying the platforms completely. Humans wanted prisoners. Not just Victory General Kate Morrison coordinated the ground invasion from her command, Ship Mars Defender, while thousands of human soldiers prepared to land on the surface. Their mission was to capture government officials and secure evidence of war crimes, not to massacre civilians. The Zeltharian capital city was built like a fortress with massive walls and underground bunkers where the leadership could hide during attacks. But human engineers had studied the city's construction for months and knew exactly where to strike to bring down the defenses. Colonel Dan Martinez led a special operations team directly to the government complex, where Supreme Chancellor Korvac was hiding with his remaining advisors. The mission was personal for Martinez, but he remained professional as he hunted the leaders who had ordered attacks on human children. The battle for the capital lasted only 6 hours because Zeltharian resistance collapsed when their soldiers realized they were fighting to defend child torturers. Many alien units surrendered rather than die for leaders who had brought shame to their species. Maya Johnson hacked into the planetary communication system and broadcast footage of the torture experiments that had been discovered at the research stations. When ordinary Zeltharians saw what their government had been doing to human children, many turned against their own leaders. Supreme Chancellor Korvac was found hiding in his private bunker, surrounded by luxury goods and weapons stolen from conquered worlds. The once mighty ruler who had laughed at human declarations of war now cowered before Colonel Martinez and begged for mercy. The capture of the Zeltharian leadership marked the end of organized resistance. But humans were not satisfied with military victory alone. President Chen announced that the empire would be completely dismantled and its territory placed under human administration until war crimes trials were completed. The trial of Ambassador Vex's Tar began 3 weeks later in the same courthouse where human rights had been established centuries earlier. Representatives from every human colony attended, while billions more watched the proceedings on live broadcast throughout the galaxy. Billy Martinez entered the courtroom wearing his scars like badges of honor and carrying himself with dignity that impressed everyone present. The 8-year-old boy had grown stronger during the months of war, and his courage inspired humans across known space. Vextar sat in the defendant's chair surrounded by human guards and showed no emotion as the charges were read. He was accused of biological warfare against civilians, torture of prisoners, and conspiracy to commit genocide against human children. Dr. Amy Foster testified about the nature of the acid that had burned Billy's face and explained how it had been specifically engineered to cause maximum pain and permanent damage. The weapon was designed for torture, not defense, which proved criminal intent. Professor Kevin Walsh presented evidence from captured documents showing that the attack on Billy had been planned as part of a larger campaign against human children. The Zeltharians had intended to break human morale by targeting the most innocent victims. Survivors of the torture experiments gave testimony that horrified the courtroom audience. young Amy Martinez, who had been rescued from the research station, described months of daily acid attacks while alien scientists laughed at her suffering. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but the most powerful moment came when Billy Martinez took the witness stand and faced his attacker. The boy spoke clearly and without fear as he described the day that had changed everything. Billy said that he had been playing with his ball when the alien spit acid on his face for no reason except cruelty. He explained how much it had hurt and how scared he had been, but also how proud he was that his suffering had led to justice for other victims. When the defense attorney asked if Billy wanted revenge against the Zeltharians, the boy surprised everyone with his answer. He said that he did not want all aliens to suffer, but he wanted the bad ones to be stopped so they could never hurt other children. The verdict was unanimous, and the sentence was death by the same biological weapon that Vextar had used against Billy. The ambassador would face the same pain he had inflicted on an innocent child, but his execution would be broadcast as a warning to other species. President Chen announced that the trial's conclusion marked the beginning of a new era in galactic relations. The Zeltharian Empire was officially dissolved, and its former territory would be administered by human peacekeeping forces. The surviving Zeltharian population would be required to attend education programs about the rights of children and the consequences of cruelty. They would make reparations to human victims, and their children would learn about the importance of protecting the innocent. Billy Martinez was invited to plant the first Earth flag on the former Zeltharian homeworld in a ceremony that symbolized humanity's victory over those who targeted children. The boy who had been attacked for playing with a ball now represented the power of human determination. Admiral Richardson established permanent naval bases throughout former Zeltharian space to ensure that no similar government could rise again. Human ships would patrol these systems for generations to protect any species that might become victims of aggression. Colonel Martinez was promoted to general and given command of the new peacekeeping corps that would enforce galactic laws protecting children of all species. His son's courage had inspired the creation of an organization dedicated to preventing future atrocities. The Martinez Accords were signed by every major alien government and established universal laws protecting young life throughout the galaxy. Any species that attacked children would face the full military might of humanity and its allies. Dr. Carter led research into neutralizing biological weapons and developing medical treatments for torture victims. His work ensured that future attacks, like the one on Billy, would be quickly treatable and that victims could recover completely. The war that had started with one alien spitting acid on one human child had changed the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity had proven that peaceful species could become terrible enemies when their children were threatened. Other alien governments rushed to sign friendship treaties with Earth, and many requested human protection for their own colonies. The species that had once been dismissed as weak had become the guardians of innocence throughout known space. Supreme Chancellor Korvac and his surviving advisors were executed for war crimes, while their former subjects worked to rebuild their society under human supervision. The Zeltharian species would survive, but they would never again be allowed to hold positions of power. President Chen addressed the galaxy one final time from the former Zeltharian throne world and announced that humanity would never again tolerate attacks on children. The age of human patience was over, and the age of human protection had begun. Billy Martinez grew up to become a diplomat who specialized in children's rights and spent his life ensuring that no other child would suffer as he had. His scars reminded everyone of why humanity fought, but his kindness showed them what they were fighting for. The red ball that had started everything was preserved in a museum dedicated to the war and the victory of justice over cruelty. Children from across the galaxy came to see it and learn about the boy who had changed the universe by simply being brave. Earth's message to the stars was clear and simple. Hurt our children and face complete annihilation. Protect the innocent and find humanity's eternal friendship. The choice belonged to every species, but the consequences were absolute and unavoidable. The galaxy had learned what happened when someone spit on a human child, and the lesson would never be forgotten.